Imagine being locked away for life just because someone thought you were odd or different. 100 years ago, you didn't even need a real diagnosis to end up in a mental hospital. If you were poor, widowed, an immigrant who couldn't speak English, or just didn't fit society's rules, you could find yourself behind the heavy doors of what they called a lunatic asylum. These weren't hospitals like we think of today. They were places where people were hidden, forgotten, and often mistreated. This week on Weird History, we're pulling back the iron gates and stepping inside America's earliest psychiatric institutions. Places with crumbling walls, cold stone corridors, and stories that still haunt us. While some of this history is horrific, it shaped the mental health care system we know today. Now, quick warning, this episode dives into some heavy topics, including abuse, neglect, and medical treatments that often caused more harm than good.
So if you think this is just some dull history lesson, think again, because the truth is darker than fiction. And to understand how bad things were, let's go back to 1887. A 23-year-old journalist named Nellie Bly did something that no one had dared before. She faked insanity to get committed in an asylum.
She wanted to expose what life was really like for patients, not the polished version doctors told the public, but the raw, ugly truth. Nellie wanted to cover serious topics, but as a woman in a male-dominated field, she had to fight for every assignment. She went into the office of Joseph Pulitzer, the editor of a major newspaper called The New York World. And Pulitzer challenged her to go undercover at New York's most notorious asylum, Blackwell's Island.
And she took the challenge.
She absolutely did. And to pull it off, Nellie checked into a women's boarding house. She started acting confused, paranoid, and just out of it. She told people that she didn't know who she was, and she stayed up all night staring blankly and even refused to eat, saying the food was poisoned. She later wrote, "I lay awake all night, staring at the wall as though my mind was lost in a terrible dream. The other women watched me with growing fear, and by morning, the matron had called the police. Nellie begged for them not to take her. She sold the act perfectly and was quickly diagnosed as hopelessly insane. Within 24 hours, she was on her way to Blackwell's Island."
Jeez, was that easy?
Yep. So Blackwell's Island, today called Roosevelt Island, it sits in the East River between Manhattan and Queens. And in the 1800s, this was where New York sent people it didn't want to deal with, prisoners, the poor, and the mentally ill. And by 1839, the city built its first public mental hospital there. But it wasn't about healing. It was more about hiding people away.
And here's the crazy part. The main entrance into the old asylum still stands today in its original location on Roosevelt Island, what used to be called Blackwell's Island. It's been flipped into these fancy luxury apartments called the Octagon, with a pool and a gym and a pretty cool lounge. And if you have $6,400 a month lying around, you could get a 2-bedroom apartment. But just remember, you'd be living in a place that once echoed with screams and suffering.
Sounds like you're trying to sell it.
I mean, someone's gotta.
And Nellie's time inside the original walls was horrifying. The first thing they did was strip her of her dignity. She was given a thin towel, shoved in a cold room, and forced through what she called a torture bath. Ice cold water dumped over her head in buckets until she gasped for air. Then, soaking wet, she was ordered to bed. She described their hygiene practices as appalling. Dozens of women shared filthy towels and combs. Some had open sores. The attendants yanked their hair, slapped them, and barked orders. Some had missing patches of hair from hair pulling. And others told Nellie of horror stories of being choked nearly to death, unconscious, when they cried or put up a fight.
Jeez, sounds awful. How was the food?
If you can even call it that. Hard, dark bread, cold tea, oatmeal so bitter it made her gag. And one day she found a spider baked in her bread. And later on, when a grand jury toured the place, the kitchen was magically spotless with fresh white bread, clearly staged to hide the truth. Nellie wrote, What accepting torture would produce insanity quicker than this treatment? Here is a class of women sent to be cured. I would like the expert physicians who are engaged in the work of examining these lunatics to take a perfectly sane woman, shut her up, and make her sit from 6 a.m. until 8 p.m. on straight back benches. Do not allow her to talk or move during these 14 hours, give her no reading, and let her know nothing of the world or its doings. Give her bad food and harsh treatment, and see how long it takes to make her insane.
And this is when she realized that most of these women, they weren't even mentally ill.
Yeah, exactly. Although some of them were, a lot were immigrants who couldn't speak English. Some were simply poor. There was one German woman who couldn't convince anyone that she was sane because no one could understand her. And once you were labeled crazy, there was no way to prove otherwise. Nellie tried acting completely normal, but she said, the more sanely I talked and acted, the crazier I was thought to be.
And if the newspaper never sent a lawyer, she would have never got out.
Yeah, just like the countless women who had no one fighting for them. Nellie spent 10 days inside before Pulitzer's team rescued her. Her exposé, 10 Days in a Madhouse, caused national outrage. A grand jury investigated, and New York City increased funding for mental health care by $1 million. And Blackwell's was just one asylum. Across the country, there were hundreds more, many far worse. Take Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in West Virginia, designed to hold 250 patients, and it ended up with 2,400. People were packed into these hallways. Disease spread fast, and attendants couldn't keep up.
And then there's Byberry State Hospital in Philadelphia. By the 1940s, it was so bad that even the U.S. Army officials said it was worse than POW camps. Naked patients wandered through filthy hallways, rats ran over their food, and sewage flooded the floors. Life magazine published shocking photos in 1946, and the country was horrified.
And there's also Danvers State Hospital in Massachusetts. While not the first lobotomy site, it became famous for the procedure. Built in 1878 with the Kirkbride-style architecture, it started as a place of moral treatment. But by the 1940s, it was overcrowded and performing lobotomies on hundreds of patients. Death was very common inside these places. If you died without family to claim you, your body was just dumped in a potter's field, a mass grave. In Hart Island in New York, America's largest public cemetery has over 1 million burials, many of them former asylum patients who died nameless and forgotten. Now, not everyone believed asylums had to be like prisons. Dr. Thomas Story Kirkbride wanted to build hospitals that felt like places of healing, lots of sunlight, gardens, fresh air.
And for a while it worked. Patients had space, fresh food, and even ballrooms.
But by the early 1900s, overcrowding ruined everything. And by the 1950s, treatments became harsh. There was shock therapy, insulin comas, and by the 1970s, deinstitutionalization began. And the treatments were sometimes worse than the conditions. Ice baths, restraints, and forced purging were considered normal.
And later came lobotomies, doctors literally cutting brain connections to control behavior.
The first U.S. lobotomy was in 1936, performed by Walter Freeman and James Watts at George Washington University Hospital in Washington, D.C. And he later developed the infamous ice pick lobotomy in 1946, where he'd hammer a thin metal tool through the eye socket.
Ugh.
And it took less than 10 minutes and actually ruined thousands of lives. I always get so squeamish hearing about lobotomies.
They're pretty nuts.
And Freeman was disturbingly proud of his work.
Yeah, didn't he take before and after pictures of his patients?
Yeah, to prove that their procedure was a positive thing. He even would pose them like they were trophies. But the results were often heartbreaking. Some people who had vibrant personalities were left vacant and broken.
There was a woman he nicknamed the meanest woman in his notes. And after her lobotomy, Freeman said that she became pleasant and giggled a lot like a child. And to him, this was success.
Even Rosemary Kennedy, JFK's sister, was lobotomized at 23, and the procedure left her with the mind of a toddler for the rest of her life. And before lobotomies, doctors tried chemical shock therapy, injecting metrazole to cause violent seizures. Patients would break bones from the force of convulsions. Then there was electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT. It replaced it in the 1940s. Now, early ECT, it was rough. There was no anesthesia, but it's still used today, though it's much more regulated than it used to be. Now, Ricky and I walked through some grim history, but here's the question. Have we really moved on? Elder abuse in nursing homes is still a massive issue. There's overmedication, neglect, even restraints. These things still happen, although they are often reported. And then there's the troubled teen industry. Paris Hilton spoke out in 2020 about her experience at Provo Canyon School. She described being drugged, isolated, emotionally abused. And later, in testimony before a U.S. Congressional Committee in June of 2024, she reiterated these claims, saying she was force-fed medications and subjected to various abuses, including sexual mistreatment and restraints. And there's additional news coverage confirming her testimony, saying that she was force-fed medications and sexually abused by the staff. Paris fought for years to pass the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act, which became law in 2024. It bans abusive practices, forces oversight, and finally gives survivors a voice. And she's not the only one. Other facilities like Trails Carolina in North Carolina and Circle of Hope Ranch in Missouri have been investigated for horrific abuse. Girls chained, starved, or assaulted.
Yeah, I mean, there's also Diamond Ranch Academy in Utah. They were exposed for covering up deaths and neglect.
Survivors are speaking out, and thanks to people like Paris, these places are finally under the microscope. Asylums may be gone or stand today as empty, abandoned buildings. Some said to be haunted by restless spirits. But what truly lingers is the dark legacy they left behind, revealing how society has long treated its most vulnerable. Today, it seems like isolation and sedation still sometimes win over compassion and care. If this episode makes you wonder about what's happening in a facility near you, trust your instincts. We'll have resources and hotlines in the show notes. And thank you so much for joining us during this journey into one of history's darkest chapters. We hope you enjoyed this bonus episode of Weird History by Crime Salad. And for more stories like this, be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening. We'll see you next week.